The Stockwell possessions. I'd just moved into a new house share in Stockwell. I was studying biomedical sciences at King's College at the time, and this was the first time I'd rented. I'd lived in halls of residence before this, and I'd lived at home with my parents before that, so I was really excited to have my own house, which I was going to be sharing with 4 of my new best friends. The house was a big, old Victorian townhouse. It had 3 floors and a basement area which had been converted into a kitchen and sitting room. When we moved in, everything was amazing at first. We had loads of friends over every night. We had a cool roof terrace which we used for barbecues, and we had a massive sitting room to hang out in. One thing had troubled us all from the start. When we moved in, we found loads of abandoned items belonging to a previous resident called Dave Thomas. At first it was nothing major. We find unopened letters stuffed in drawers or hidden at the back of cupboards, for example. The volume of letters was weird. We literally found dozens, all addressed to the same person, but we didn't worry too much about it. However, that all changed one day when a radiator in the sitting room detached and fell away from the wall, revealing a number of items that had been hidden from sight behind it. We found a tattered passport and a wallet with money and credit cards in it. The wallet, the passport, and everything belonged to Dave. Intrigued and slightly weirded out by this, we decided to hunt out some of the letters which hadn't been chucked out yet and read them. This is where things got really odd. Amongst the bills and junk mail were letters from Dave's family and his employers asking him to make contact urgently. One letter from Dave's brother read, "It's been 2 months since we last spoke. We're getting very worried that you're not answering your phone to us, or even letting us see you when we call round. What's wrong? What have we done? Nothing is worth cutting off your family for." You know the saying, ignorance is bliss? Well, I didn't really understand what was meant by that. That is until I heard what happened to the mysterious Dave Thomas. According to the local corner shop owner, Dave had lived at the house between 2005 and 2007. He worked in central London as a translator and had been a popular member of the local community. He lived with a group of friends, all of whom worked for the same media company in London. In January 2007, Dave's landlord instructed some redevelopments to take place at the property. The old cellar space was remodelled to become the kitchen, and the old kitchen was removed, along with its walls, to create an extra large sitting room. Shortly after the work commenced, Dave and his housemates began to claim that the house was haunted. They reported seeing objects move in front of them, as well as sensing hot and cold spots and smelling strange, overwhelming, disgusting smells. Dave responded to paranormal activity particularly badly. He became irritable and strange, shutting himself off in his room for days and weeks at a time. He also developed a frightful temper and would erupt in anger at his housemates over the most minor issues. By now, Dave had become totally isolated from his housemates. They were all keen to move out, but Dave, for whatever reason, wanted to stay behind. They decided to take a holiday together, just to get away from the house in the meantime. Of course, Dave stayed behind. Whilst they were away, Dave left the house in the dead of night. He wandered through the streets of London barefoot and eventually ended up near Vauxhall Bridge, where he took a pair of scissors from his pocket and began hacking at his throat. The subsequent coroner's inquiry found that Dave had taken his own life after a period of mental illness. It's sickening to think of someone going through what Dave went through. It's creepy and eerie to think the whole morbid episode started in my house. It's even worse when you realise the house still contains personal effects belonging to the deceased. When I heard the story, at first I found it hard to believe, but it was confirmed as being true by loads of other locals at different times. Obviously we got rid of Dave's possessions immediately, bundling them together with the letters and returning them to the address on his brother's letter. Had it just been Dave that had been affected by this, the story wouldn't be quite so chilling, but that wasn't the case. Over the course of the next few weeks, more information emerged regarding the strange activity. At the same time that Dave's tragic saga was unfolding, two neighbours also started to behave in a strange and erratic way. The first, a 68-year-old Portuguese woman, lived in the adjacent property to Dave's. Her sister had become so disturbed by the inexplicable and lunatic behaviour she was showing that she called the Catholic Church on the recommendations of her family GP. Although it is entirely unsubstantiated, it was claimed locally that the church performed a full exorcism on the individual, complete with crucifixes, holy water, and priests chanting "The power of Christ compels you." The sisters moved out of the property weeks later. The other victim was a man in his 20s who lived opposite Dave in a maisonette. He was the son of a prominent politician, and it was his ordeal that attracted the attention of the national newspapers. Nothing made it onto the pages of the interested newspapers, because it was rumoured that the guy's dad was a friend of a few powerful editors, and that they had ensured that the story got buried. The young man's girlfriend had called the emergency services several times in response to his bizarre and aggressive behaviour. Eventually, he attempted to attack his girlfriend with a claw hammer, and was subsequently detained and committed under the Mental Health Act, ending up at a secure institution in North London. Stories circulated in which it was claimed that the young man had attributed his behaviour to being under the control of a mysterious entity. He allegedly stated that he had been regularly visited in the early mornings by a ghost called Sid, and that Sid had hold of him at all times and was capable of causing his death at any moment. Me and my housemates were totally freaked out from what we had learned. I can't overstate how much stories like this would change the way you relate to your home or even your whole neighbourhood. Although we had not personally experienced any paranormal activity, the house had become strangely oppressive, and we all felt our behaviour and our moods altering. We wanted to move out as soon as possible, but we were limited by the lack of a deposit for a new place. We had to face a grim reality that we would probably need to stay put for quite a while. I was fortunate. My parents lived in Guildford, which is close to London. I ended up spending most of my time back home, away from the house. My housemate Kelly wasn't in such a fortunate position. She worked locally at a pub, and her family home was miles away. She couldn't move away like me, so she had to stay put, surrounded by the terror, hostility, and oppression of the house. The fear in the house was palpable. You could cut the atmosphere. I'd get goosebumps and chills all the time I was there, and I'd feel hypersensitive, like I was always being watched over. I couldn't sleep at nights, and found myself becoming nocturnal whenever I stayed at the property for more than a few days in a row. On occasions, I'd feel like there was someone, or something, stood right up against me. It was only a sense, but it was powerful and overwhelming, and left me feeling constantly vulnerable and occasionally violated. I'm not sure whether it was these feelings that eventually did it for Kelly, but in April 2010, while she was staying at the house alone, she threw herself from the roof terrace onto the pavement below. By God's grace alone, Kelly survived. She broke both her legs, one arm, and her collarbone, but thankfully she had no serious or life-threatening injuries. Eventually, she made a full recovery. Later, Kelly claimed not to remember the sequence of events that had led her to the roof that night, recalling only having taken a bath earlier the same evening, then resting on her bed because of a sudden headache. This was the final straw for us. We packed up and moved out within a couple of days of Kelly's accident. However, it wasn't quite case closed. When we finally got to speak to the landlord, who was an expat living in Spain, he told us that he had personally witnessed paranormal activity at the house, but he refused to accept that this was in any way connected to the mayhem that was being wrought upon the street and its residents. He had lived at the property himself in the 1980s. He first noticed something was amiss when his pet dog started behaving strangely. Never timid before, the 3-year-old collie blankly refused to go into certain rooms. Months into their time at the house, the landlord's girlfriend at the time had awoken several times in the early morning to see a figure stood at the end of their bed. A medium was brought in who advised the landlord to move out as soon as possible, but she refused to divulge any information on the spirit she claimed to have detected. Shortly after this, the landlord quit the property and began renting it out. One of my now ex-housemates was studying history at University College. She decided to research the street and the property in a bid to work out what we had all just experienced, and perhaps to find a reason for the malevolence that seemingly inhabited this area of Stockwell. She discovered that the street had been built in 1842 under the management of Sir Sidney Wainwright, a property developer. Sir Sidney was a self-made man with a tyrannical personality. He had actually passed away on the site during the construction of the houses. We also discovered that the street had had a total of 39 suicides during its 175-year history, as well as 6 murders, including 1 triple murder, a wife and her 2 daughters, in 1872. I'd never believed in curses or ghosts or possessions before my experience at Stockwell, but now I know I was living alongside some dark force, and that this force was powerful enough to control people. You need to be aware that forces don't have to be physical in order to pose a serious physical threat. Call me superstitious, but 39 suicides, 6 murders, that seems a bit too high for a street with just 24 houses.